Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. How about those Alabama Crimson Tide? Alabama hosting Texas A&M. Everybody's looking at this game, trying to figure out, okay, how good is Bama? How good is Mac Jones? I'll tell you this. First of all, I never really doubted Mac Jones. If you go back to last year, they put up 50-something points against Auburn, and their defense just couldn't make a stop, and that's why they lost that game. But Mac Jones played well in that game. Mac Jones played well against Michigan in the bowl game. I always thought Mac Jones was good. So first of all, shout out to Bama. They look Bama-esque again. They look, again, like a team that is good enough to compete for a national championship, absolutely annihilating Texas A&M, 52-24. They win by 4 touchdowns. And I'll tell you this, they look like the favorite in the SEC right now, like they always do. Mac Jones looks awesome. They got the 2 wide receivers, Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. Najee Harris, maybe the best running back in college football. So they look awesome. But the story, and I say this sometimes, right? You know, we always want to talk about the team that won, the team that's good, the team that had success. But sometimes the story coming out of a game is the team that lost. And in this case, it is certainly the Texas A&M Aggies, okay? And to fully understand why Texas A&M is the story, I do think we kind of have to go into a little bit of context and explain a little bit of backstory of what's going on at Texas A&M. Again, we have a lot of A&M fans who do listen to this show. I do go on radio every week in College Station. And so when we talk about Texas A&M, this is what you have to remember. You have to go back to that magical time of late 2017, which, by the way, was the last time Arkansas won a football game, which we'll get into in a second, an SEC game. 2017, if you remember, that coaching cycle was one of the craziest coaching cycles in the history of college football. Literally almost every big name brand opened up that year. Florida opened up, ended up getting Dan Mullen. Nebraska opened up, ended up getting Scott Frost. Oregon opened up when Willie Taggart left for Florida State to replace Jimbo Fisher. Florida State opened up. So we had Florida State, Mississippi State, Nebraska. But the big story in 2017 was Jimbo Fisher. And what I will tell you with Jimbo Fisher is very simply this. When Texas A&M, September, October, when they realized that Kevin Sumlin, their former coach, wasn't going to be there, I know this for a fact. There's a little bit of insider information. The big wigs down in A&M got together, and they said, we are getting a coach with a national championship pedigree. We are going to go get someone that can take us to the upper level because we have invested so much money into this program. All we need is the right coach. And in their defense, they really have. For people who do not know, Texas A&M committed about $500 million to stadium upgrades and to facility upgrades the year after Johnny Manziel won the Heisman. And the reason being very simply like, dude, we're in the SEC. We're here. We're Texas's program in the best conference in college football, and we believe we are ready to take that next step. And so when they fired Kevin Sumlin, they said, we are going after a coach that has won a national championship or at the very least has been in that very short conversation. I know they wanted Dabo Swinney. Dabo obviously wasn't interested. I know they wanted James Franklin. James Franklin wasn't interested. I believe there was a call to Chris Peterson. The AD at the time at Texas A&M had worked with Chris Peterson at Washington. Chris Peterson has obviously since retired. But that was a job where the boosters and the donors basically said this. We'll write you whatever check you want if you get us the right guy. And if you remember, Jimbo Fisher was at that time the right guy. Florida State wins the national championship in 2013. They make the first college football playoff in 2014. 2015, they play in a big bowl game. And so you get to 2017, and he is one of the best coaches that you can actually convince to leave another school, and Texas A&M gets him. And I'm bringing all this up because you have to remember the context of this conversation. You have to remember the price tag that Texas A&M paid for Jimbo Fisher. And if you don't remember that price tag, here is what it is. $75 million, 10 years, all guaranteed. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that Jimbo Fisher, if he goes 1-9 this year and Texas A&M decides to fire him, they owe him every single dollar from that coaching salary, $75 million guaranteed. I could be wrong, but I believe for a new head coach, it is the most anyone has ever spent. I mean, 10 years at 7.5 per year for 10 years is insane. A 5-year contract is good. A 6-year contract is really good. A 10-year contract is unheard of. I don't think there's another one in college football like that. Now, you got college basketball where John Calipari has a lifetime contract. By the way, shout out to Steve Alford, who has a 10-year contract in Nevada. But when you look at Texas A&M, they pushed all the chips in the middle with Jimbo Fisher. And so why is Texas A&M the topic of today's show and the topic of this conversation, even though Alabama was clearly the better team and won? It's because we're getting a go time with Jimbo Fisher. And it is about time that we start asking some tough questions about Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M and what he's doing in the development of this program. Because when you look at the situation on Saturday, there is no other way to put it other than that it was an unmitigated disaster. Okay? So Jimbo Fisher is now in year 3 at Texas A&M. And I think for the most part, he's done pretty well for himself. Year 1, he gets there, takes over a new program. They end up winning 9 games. And in the SEC West, in your first year, 9 wins is pretty darn impressive. They didn't beat Bama, but they also played Clemson in the out-of-conference, and it was a really tough schedule. So they win 9 games. Last year, they go 8-5. But in defense of Jimbo, they played maybe the toughest schedule in the history of college football. For people who don't remember, they played Clemson in the out-of-conference. They played Alabama, LSU. Then they had a crossover game with Georgia. So in total, and I don't think this has ever happened before, they played 3 teams last year that were ranked number 1 in the country when they played them. They played Clemson when Clemson was ranked number 1. They played Bama when Bama was ranked number 1. They played LSU when LSU was ranked number 1. And oh, by the way, they played Georgia when Georgia was ranked number 4 in the country. Toughest schedule ever. You can forgive them for going 8-5. Here's the issue, though. We are currently in year 3. And by year 3, if you are a head coach that is being paid $75 million, it is time to start showing that you can compete with the big boys. Year 1, it's okay. Year 2, we know you're building. But year 3 is kind of go time, right? I mean, think about it. Nick Saban wins a national championship year 3. Urban Meyer has Ohio State competing for national championships in year 3. Kirby Smart, whatever you want to say about him, and I've been crazy critical of Kirby Smart, he had Georgia in the college football playoff in year 2 competing for a national championship. And so I don't think it's unrealistic for A&M fans to have had bigger expectations coming into this year. They returned a lot of guys. Now, I do understand they had some guys opt out, most notably their best wide receiver, Jamon Austin. But it doesn't change the fact that expectations are still ratcheted up. And if you're an A&M fan, you wanted to go into Bama on Saturday and at the very least feel like you could compete with Bama. If you don't beat Bama at Bama, it happens. There's not many teams that do that. Joe Burrow did it last year. Joe Burrow's an outlier. There's not many teams that beat Bama at Bama, okay? And so if you're A&M, what you want from your program is if we can't win, we at least want to compete. We at least want to show that we are improving, that the gap is narrowing between us and the best teams in this conference, which in turn means that the gap is narrowing between us and the best teams in college football. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Texas A&M loses by 28 on the road at Alabama. They give up 52 points, which is essentially the most that they've given up since Jimbo Fisher has gotten to Texas A&M. Now, technically, they gave up 72 in a 7-overtime game against LSU, but taking that game out, most points they've given up, biggest margin of victory in a loss. And it's very clear that the gap is not narrowing between Texas A&M and the elite teams in this conference. And so I do understand the frustration of Texas A&M fans. We're paying a lot of money, and we need to see results. And I think what's especially frustrating is that Jimbo Fisher was known as an offensive guru, an offensive savant when he got to Texas A&M, and this offense kind of looks the same every single year. It was actually pretty good a few years ago when he first got there, but last year it ranked 8th in the SEC out of 14 teams. And this year, it ranks 8th out of 14 teams in the SEC. And you can't even use an excuse of, well, we just played Bama, because you opened week 1 against Vanderbilt, and you couldn't move the ball against Vandy. You narrowly win, close win to the worst team in the SEC at home. You can't use the excuse that it's because we're in the SEC and our schedule's tough. Because Florida's moving the ball. Georgia looked pretty darn good the other night. Bama just put up 52 on your behind. And so I do understand the frustration for A&M fans, right? At some point, we have to narrow the gap, and it's not happening. And not only is it not happening, we're not even taking the steps that we think we should be taking. Our offense looks exactly the same as it did the day you got here. Kellen Mond, our quarterback, who I actually thought, all things considered, didn't play terribly on Saturday, he kind of looks like the same guy he did as a true freshman. Looks like a guy that can complete the short passes, can hand the ball off, running backs run between the tackles, but there's nothing dynamic about it. You think about the dynamic coaches offensively in college football, many of them now reside in the SEC. Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach, Lincoln Riley, who's obviously not in the SEC, Dana Holgerson. Heck, if you just think in the SEC, think about all the great play callers that you think of. I just mentioned 2 of them, Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach, Dan Mullen, Steve Sarkisian, the Alabama offensive coordinator. Where is Jimbo Fisher's not even in the conversation? He's supposed to be the offensive guru that you're paying $75 million a year to. And so I do understand the frustration of A&M fans, and I do understand it's year 3 and it's go time. And you can't even use, well, I just got here as an excuse anymore. I think it's actually very interesting that we're kind of at this brink, this turning point with Jimbo Fisher, because he's playing Florida this week. Well, guess what? Dan Mullen's in his 3rd year as head coach at Florida. That team's rolling. Kyle Trask is probably the Heisman favorite right now, and their tight end Kyle Pitts is probably right behind him. How about staying in the SEC, Jeremy Pruitt? I'm not comparing Texas A&M to Tennessee, because Tennessee, even though they're on an 8-game win streak, hasn't played anybody. We're going to get to Tennessee in a minute. But at the end of the day, Tennessee has won 8 straight. Like, Tennessee is playing great football right now. Jeremy Pruitt's in year 3. So what's your excuse, Jimbo Fisher? And so I do think A&M fans have kind of hit that wall of like, dude, we gave you year 1. We gave you year 2. But it's year 3. These are your guys. It's a veteran roster, 16 starters back. We need to start seeing some results. Now, I will say in Jimbo Fisher's defense, he's not on the hot seat. Nobody's about to fire him. Texas A&M would owe him way, way, way too much money to do that. But, man, they're also not paying him to go to Alabama and lose by 28. They're not paying him to not close that gap. And I will just tell you very simply that this is a big weekend for Jimbo Fisher. Texas A&M hosts Florida. And if you are who you claim you are, if you are that coach, that $75 million man that was brought to Texas A&M to win a national championship, it's time to start delivering, man.